400 years. 4 centuries of silence, separation, and survival. Our people were stolen, carried across an ocean, and forced to build a nation with blood, sweat, and brilliance. They told us Africa had forgotten. They told us the ties had been severed forever. But today, a voice rises from Burkina Faso, a soldier turned leader, Captain Ibrahim. At just 35 years old, he speaks not as a president in uniform, but as a brother calling his family home. He tells us the truth no one dared to speak: you were never abandoned. This is not just a message about politics. This is about healing a wound cut into our souls, about a reunion 4 centuries in the making. For every African American elder who looked at the stars wondering if Africa was still looking back, the answer is yes. For every ancestor who prayed their children would return, the time has come. Stay with us, because this is not just another story. It is the future our ancestors dreamed of, the dawn of an Africa that will never bow again. It began in silence, the kind of silence only a restless leader knows when the world is asleep, but the weight of a nation refuses to let him rest. It was 3 in the morning in Ouagadougou. The city lay still, the night air heavy with heat, but inside the presidential residence, Captain Ibrahim paced like a man carrying centuries on his shoulders. He was 35 years old, yet the fatigue in his eyes belonged to someone who had lived many lifetimes. Sleep would not come. His country was at war with itself, not only against armed insurgents in the north, but against the ghosts of colonial control still clinging to the land. To distract his mind, he opened his laptop, and in that moment, a different struggle flashed across the screen. Minneapolis, Detroit, Louisville. He saw George Floyd's last breath, Breonna Taylor's stolen life, and the faces of young black men and women filling American streets, their fists raised against injustice. What struck him was not the difference, but the mirror. The chants for dignity in America echoed the same cries for sovereignty in Burkina Faso. The courage of protesters in the Bronx carried the same fire as his soldiers in the Sahel. 2 continents apart, yet one struggle bound them together, a struggle older than both lands, stretching back 400 years to chains, ships, and an ocean that tried to erase family. The realization pierced him like lightning. "I am looking at myself," he whispered into the empty room. And in that instant, the burden of leadership no longer felt political. It felt ancestral. So he did what leaders rarely do. He reached not for his ministers or his generals, but for his grandmother. At 89 years old, she was the guardian of memory, the keeper of their family's oral history. The phone rang longer than his patience could bear, and when she finally answered, her voice was faint but steady. "Grandmother," he said, his throat tight, "when our people were taken across the ocean, did we ever stop believing they were still our family?" There was silence on the line, so long that he thought she had drifted to sleep. But then her words came soft, trembling, yet sharp enough to cut through 4 centuries. "Ibrahim," she said, "every night for 400 years, African mothers looked at the stars and wondered if their stolen children were looking back at the same sky. Every harvest, we set aside food for family who might never return, but whom we never stopped claiming as ours. Every celebration, we sang songs for voices silenced, yet never forgotten. We never stopped waiting for you to remember who you are." The young captain's eyes filled. In her words he heard not only memory but indictment. The separation between Africans and African Americans was not natural. It had been engineered, maintained, and enforced by powers who knew that a united black people would shake the world. That night, Captain Ibrahim made a silent vow. He would not be the leader who carried on the lie of separation. He would not let the next generation grow up believing that the Atlantic Ocean was stronger than blood. He would find a way, not as a politician, but as a son of Africa, calling his brothers and sisters back home. And so, from a sleepless night in Ouagadougou, history began to turn. 6 months passed after that midnight call to his grandmother, yet her words echoed in Captain Ibrahim's heart like a drumbeat he could not silence. And then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the red earth of Ouagadougou, an envelope arrived. It bore no official seal, no grand insignia, just a name written in neat American script: Dr. Aisha Williams, Howard University, Washington, D.C. He opened it slowly, expecting perhaps another diplomatic request, another political courtesy. But this letter was something entirely different. It was not a policy proposal, it was a cry from across the ocean. "Mr. President," it began, "I know where I come from now. I found my village. I found my people. I found my history. But I do not know how to come home. Dr. Williams explained how she had spent 3 years piecing together her lineage. DNA results, church records, whispered stories preserved through generations. And finally, the discovery. Her blood traced back to the mossy kingdom, to the very soil beneath his feet. She had found the names of her great-great-grandparents, people stolen into bondage centuries before. She had located the village they once walked, the ground they once tilled, the songs they once sang. But then came the sentence that broke his heart. I have found where I come from, but I do not know if there is still a place for me here. I do not know how to cross the bridge between who I was before slavery and who I became after. Ibrahim read the letter once, twice, 17 times. By his own admission, each time the same sensation overtook him: shame. Not shame for her, but for himself, for Africa, for the continent that had allowed the children stolen away to feel like strangers in their own ancestral land, for the silence that had lasted too long. That night, he did something unprecedented. He picked up his phone, dialed an international code, and asked to be connected directly to Howard University. It was not protocol. It was not diplomacy. It was family. Dr. Williams, he said when she answered, his voice both firm and trembling. This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I received your letter, and I have one thing to tell you. You are not a stranger here. You are a daughter returning home, and we have been waiting for you. The line went quiet, and then the dam broke. A conversation that was meant to be brief lasted 3 hours. She told him about her life in America, the constant proving of her worth, the exhaustion of walking into rooms where she was the only black woman, the hollow victories that demanded assimilation instead of authenticity. She spoke of achievements that brought no peace, of accolades that never erased the question, where do I truly belong? Yet she also spoke of the transformation that began when she discovered her African roots. For the first time, she felt anchored in a story older than chains. A story not defined by oppression, but by kingdoms, languages, and brilliance, stretching back millennia. And in that moment, Captain Ibrahim made her a promise. A promise that would alter not only her life, but the direction of his presidency, and perhaps the course of history. You will not be the last, he vowed. We will build bridges, not just for you, but for every member of our scattered family who longs to come home. We will not wait for permission. We will begin now. That pledge was the seed of what would later be called the Reunion, not an official program, not a government initiative, but a quiet movement born out of love and responsibility. A movement to reconnect the severed branches of a family tree, cut down by slavery, but never uprooted. And it all began with a letter, a single voice from across the ocean, asking the question so many had carried in silence: is there still a place for me at the table of my ancestors? In Captain Ibrahim's answer, the first bridge was built. The promise made to Dr. Aisha Williams did not remain words on a midnight call. Within months, Captain Ibrahim began reaching out not through official embassies or ministries, but directly, quietly, deliberately. He did not approach them as a head of state demanding allegiance, but as a brother seeking family. The first to answer was Marcus Johnson, a young software engineer from Oakland, California. Marcus had followed the headlines about this fiery soldier president in Africa, intrigued by his defiance of colonial powers. Yet when the phone rang and the voice on the other end said, "This is Captain Ibrahim from Burkina Faso," Marcus nearly dropped the call in disbelief. Presidents do not call ordinary men. But that was exactly the point. Marcus was not ordinary. He was family. When Marcus arrived in Ouagadougou for a 2-week visit, he expected to meet desperate young coders seeking his Silicon Valley expertise. Instead, he found peers. He found innovators building solutions for African problems with almost no resources but limitless creativity. Within days, his perception shifted. By the end of the first week, he was not just visiting Africa, he was investing in it, not as charity, not as aid, but as partnership. Together with Ibrahim's young tech team, Marcus co-founded a fintech company designed to bring financial access to African villages and diaspora communities alike. When he returned to the United States, he told friends with tears in his eyes, "For the first time, I wasn't the token black hire. I was just another professional among black professionals. I felt normal, truly normal for the first time in my life." Soon after, another voice joined. Dr. Michael Thompson, a renowned cardiovascular surgeon from Chicago, reached out. For years, He had carried the burden of proving black excellence in medicine, carving out spaces where none were designed for him. But as he spoke with Ibrahim, he asked a haunting question. What if we came home to build our own rooms of excellence, instead of begging for a seat in theirs? Their conversation lasted 4 hours. By the end, Dr. Thompson committed to spending 6 months in Burkina Faso, bringing colleagues with him, and planting the seed of a new medical school rooted not only in modern science, but in African cultural competence. That single commitment opened doors. Thompson introduced Dr. Aisha Williams, a renewable energy engineer eager to build solar grids in Africa free from the red tape of American regulation. Williams connected Ibrahim to Robert Jackson, a financial analyst who saw liberation in Africa as inseparable from economic power among African Americans. Robert then introduced Angela Davis Brown, an education specialist whose life's mission was to rescue black children from systems designed for their failure. Angela's words pierced Ibrahim deeply. What if we stopped trying to fix broken classrooms and instead built new ones in Africa, classrooms that could later inspire our children back in America? What if we shifted from being defensive about our children's potential to being offensive about their excellence? It was a vision bolder than any development plan. It was a spiritual strategy. Build strongholds in Africa that could echo across the diaspora, reshaping identity on both sides of the Atlantic. By the time the sun set on these first connections, Captain Ibrahim realized something profound. This was not about aid. This was not about remittances. This was not even about investment in the old sense. This was about family rediscovering itself, and in that rediscovery, finding power that could no longer be denied. And so, the first bridges of the reunion were built. Not with steel or stone, but with trust, vision, and bloodlines calling out to each other after 400 years. Now a question remains for every viewer, for every descendant scattered by history. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say Amen in the comments below. 6 months after the first wave of connections, Captain Ibrahim made a decision that could have ended his career if it failed. He invited 50 of the most accomplished African Americans he had spoken with to join a private summit. No cameras, no headlines. Just a digital room filled with people who carried centuries of brilliance in their veins. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. It lasted 8. Ibrahim opened with words that cut through the silence. My brothers and sisters, we are living through a moment that comes once in 500 years. We can reunite a family scattered by slavery, and together build what neither of us could alone. Then he laid out a vision that defied every colonial blueprint. An Africa that no longer exported raw cocoa and imported chocolate. An Africa that processed its own gold, manufactured its own tools, designed its own technology. And he told them plainly, what we need is not your money, what we need is your minds. The response was electric. Marcus Johnson declared he was ready to relocate permanently to Burkina Faso to help build a new tech sector from the ground up. Dr. Thompson pledged to create a medical school in partnership with 3 universities. Dr. Williams presented a continent-wide renewable energy plan. Robert Jackson unveiled a financial framework for direct diaspora investment, bypassing foreign aid. And Angela Davis Brown asked the question that left many in tears. What if we stopped trying to fix broken schools in America, and instead built new ones in Africa, schools we could one day bring back to our children at home? By the end of the summit, commitments totaled $75 million. Partnerships stretched across 7 African nations. For the first time in centuries, a direct bridge connected African leadership with African American expertise without permission from anyone. But history teaches us, every bridge invites someone to try and burn it down. Within weeks, the pressure came from all sides. The French ambassador demanded a sudden meeting, expressing concerns about Burkina Faso's expanding international activities. The World Bank stalled a development loan that had been near approval. American newspapers began publishing articles warning against Ibrahim's radical agenda and casting doubt on diaspora involvement. The attacks were not only institutional, they were personal. Dr. Thompson faced scrutiny from his hospital board about conflicts of interest. Marcus Johnson's investors asked whether his African commitments would distract from his American work. Angela Davis Brown received unexpected visits from education officials questioning her foreign activities. Even Robert Jackson's clients raised concerns about his African ties. And then came the call. It was 2 in the morning when Ibrahim answered a number he did not recognize. The voice on the line was calm, polite, and chilling. A French accent introduced itself as a concerned friend. "President Traore," the voice said, "you are a young man with a bright future. But these activities with African Americans are being watched very carefully. There are people with the power to make your presidency very difficult. We know about the meetings, we know about the plans. Africa requires guidance, experience, stability. Do not make the mistakes of Thomas Sankara." The name hung in the air like a dagger. Sankara, the revolutionary leader assassinated decades earlier for daring to dream of an Africa free from control. The threat was unmistakable, but what the caller did not understand was simple. Fear had never been Ibrahim's motivator. Justice had. And once a people have tasted connection after 400 years of separation, there is no going back. The wall had risen. But so had the determination to climb it. Despite the pressure, despite the threats, the work did not stop. In fact, it accelerated. Like water breaking through stone, the movement found cracks in the old walls and surged forward. Marcus Johnson's fintech company, born in a modest office in Ouagadougou, grew with startling speed. Within 4 months, it had reached 25,000 users across 6 African nations. Farmers who once carried cash in hidden pouches now transferred money securely by phone. Women who had been locked out of credit systems suddenly had accounts in their own names. Marcus had not just built a company, he had built trust. Dr. Michael Thompson's vision also took root. His medical training program launched with overwhelming response. 500 African American healthcare professionals applied, eager to bring their skills to the continent. For the first time, doctors who had spent decades proving their worth in hostile American systems could practice medicine in an environment where excellence was assumed, not questioned. Meanwhile, Dr. Aisha Williams oversaw the installation of solar grids in rural communities that had never known reliable power. Villages that once went dark at sunset now glowed with steady light. Children studied by lamplight powered not by foreign aid, but by African sun harnessed through African diaspora collaboration. But numbers and projects, as powerful as they were, told only part of the story. The deeper transformation was human-spiritual. One evening, a young woman from Atlanta named Ka Robinson requested a private audience with Captain Ibrahim before leaving Burkina Faso. She was 32, a successful marketing executive, financially secure, by all accounts living the American dream. Yet her voice trembled as she confessed, "In just 5 days here, I have felt something I never felt in 32 years. For the first time in my life, I felt normal. My success was not questioned. My presence was not surprising. I belonged." Her words pierced Ibrahim more deeply than any statistic. They confirmed what he had believed since that sleepless night in Ouagadougou. This was not about politics or economics. It was about healing. It was about wholeness. It was about giving his scattered family permission to breathe, to excel, without explanation. The world began to notice. Leaders of African descent in Brazil reached out, inspired by whispers of the reunion. Caribbean nations asked how they could join the model. Even African communities in Europe began inquiring about participation. What began as a phone call to one grandmother and a letter from one professor had become a ripple crossing oceans. Most significantly, messages started arriving from within the United States itself. Historically, black colleges and universities, professional associations, and business networks, they did not want symbolic gestures, they wanted systematic collaboration. They saw the possibility of an economic and cultural bridge that could strengthen both sides of the Atlantic at once. For Captain Ibrahim, the realization was staggering. This was no longer simply about Burkina Faso. It was not even just about Africa, it was about a global black family reclaiming the power of unity. In one of his addresses, he captured it in a single sentence: "We are not small, we are global." And that truth was already reshaping the future. 4 centuries ago, our people were scattered, torn from their lands, forced into chains, and told the ocean had made them strangers. But today, that lie is collapsing. What began with a sleepless night in Ouagadougou and a letter from a professor in Washington has become a living proof. We were separated but never severed. The achievements already speak loudly. 25,000 Africans connected through fintech, 500 health professionals preparing to serve, solar power illuminating villages that once lived in darkness. Yet beyond the statistics, something greater is rising, a sense of belonging that no empire, no bank, no barrier can erase. This is the Captain Ibrahim latest news the world tries to downplay. A young leader standing not just for his nation, but for a family spread across continents. And this is also the Burkina Faso latest news they hesitate to publish. That a country once dismissed as small and poor is now hosting a movement strong enough to shake global systems. But the question remains, will you be part of it? Will you walk through the door that has been closed for 400 years but now stands open? Will you choose to be a spectator to history or a builder of the future? Drop your voice in the comments. Say it with conviction. New Africa. Africa rise. Africa can do it. Because your words are not just echoes online, they are signals to our ancestors that their prayers were not in vain. If this story stirred something in your chest, do not scroll past. Like, share, speak. Subscribe because they hid our history long enough. Now it is time to speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here, family. This journey is only beginning. And as we continue, remember this. Every step you take toward Africa, African hands are reaching back to meet you. That is the promise. That is the reunion. And that is the Captain Ibrahim latest news they cannot silence.